Good morning, everybody. It's morning for me here in Hawaii. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes as people begin to enter and settle in the room. It is now 7 a.m. here in Hawaii. It is starting time, and we're just going to give it a couple of minutes to let people make their way to the room. I recognize that technology sometimes could be a little fickle. And so we're going to take a moment to just let people get here. I know for me, sometimes getting online and finding the right link at the last minute can be a little bit of a challenge. So we'll get going in just a couple of minutes. In the meantime, I invite you to just sit back and get comfortable. And I will do the same. Again, if you're just joining, welcome. Thank you for being here with me. We are going to start momentarily. I just want to give attendees an opportunity to make it into the room. I see people entering the room right now, so we'll just give it a couple of more minutes, and we will start. In the meantime, go ahead and get comfortable. Sink into the moment. This is intended to be a very peaceful presentation, a relaxful presentation, a full presentation, but nonetheless relaxing on the mind. While we are waiting for people to settle into the room, I just want to make mention that in the last email announcement about this event, there is a PDF guide for what will be covered in this session. And so it looks something like that. There's a loose agenda, as well as some of the content that I will be covering. So this PDF is in the last email that was sent just before this event began. At this point, I will also invite you to take a look at the dashboard and notice that there is a chat box. If anybody would like to chat, oh, people already have. Hi guys, I didn't see that. We got a couple of people already extending hellos and appreciation. And we got Portland here, so we got people coming to us or joining us from different parts of the country and of the world. Woohoo! Oh, I love this. Memphis, okay. Yay! Oregon, yay! Wow, this is awesome. So we're going to start shortly. It is, as I mentioned before, I'm coming to you from Hawaii. It is 7 a.m. in the morning, so it's an early morning for me. If I'm really honest, I have to say, when I was getting up this morning, I was like, what was I thinking? Scheduling it at 7 a.m. in the morning. That's the thought I had, and it was also the thought that I could forgive too. But more of that when we begin. Oh, we have someone here. We have Emma from Oxford, England. And we have Detroit as well. Kathy, how are you? Or Katie, depending how you pronounce it. Yay. Cool. Okay, so we're about the 5-minute mark. We're going to go ahead and begin. As I mentioned, there is a PDF that was shared with everybody in the last email. it is not necessary to have this PDF. So please, please don't have to scatter to try to get this PDF. It is not necessary. It is just here to support you. We still have people showing up. We have Baltimore who just came in. We have someone listening on the phone in the car. That's awesome. And we have another person, Rachel from England. Welcome. Yes. So you figured out where the chat is, so you can go ahead and chat. Please use that if at any point during this presentation you have questions. There's also, I believe, a button which requests entry into the room, in which case you can ask your questions live. That is also available to you. This next 2 hours, I've allotted 2 hours for us to spend together, there is an outline for which I'm going to go over in a moment, but this is very as casual as we can possibly be. So I just want to make that message clear, that this is really about not taking anything too serious, including our awakening. This is a very joyful and peaceful experience. Hi, Dale from Houston. Welcome. Okay, so I'm going to begin. The first thing I'd like to do is just go over the outline so you have an idea of what we will be discussing over the next 2 hours. I will also share with you a little bit about myself and, what's my intention? Why am I here? Why am I sharing? And also, my experience in my life. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm sure there's people who've registered who may not have known about me and my teaching, or may not even know about A Course in Miracles. So the first thing that we're going to do is I will give an introduction and share a little bit about me so that you have a reference point from which you know where I'm coming from and the teaching that I'm bringing to the table. I'm going to share a little synopsis about A Course in Miracles for anybody who is not familiar with A Course in Miracles. I will give a little synopsis, but I do want to mention that this webinar isn't about explaining what A Course in Miracles is, although I will share a little bit about that. There is an online e-course that I've created that you're welcome to take. It is free, which gives an outline or overview of the course. I think it's comprehensive. So I encourage you at some point after this event, if you are inspired to do so, to take that introduction e-course, which will give you an overview. Beverly asks, where is the PDF? The PDF, Beverly, was sent in the last email that alerted you about this event. So again, if you don't have it, that's okay, but that's where you find it. And then I'm going to go into 7, what I'm calling miracle-minded teachings from A Course in Miracles. So these are 7 teachings that, for me in my experience, have had a profound effect on how I see life or experience life. When I was thinking or having the thoughts of putting this online webinar event together, the thought was, okay, so what am I here to bring? What am I here to offer? And these 7 practices, or these 7 what I'm calling miracle-minded trainings, came forward, and so I'm here to share that with you, and I will go over that with you as well. And then at the end, we will have a Q&A session, in which case, if there are any questions, you can ask. But I don't want you to hold back on your questions if you have questions in the midst of the presentation. So the first thing I'd like to start off with is a little introduction about who I am. My name is Craig Villarubia. For those of you who don't know me, I am a student and teacher of A Course in Miracles. And like everybody who's here, I have been on a search. And it has been a search to find happiness, to discover happiness, to embody happiness, to recognize happiness in my experience. And this search for happiness has always been in my experience. In fact, as a very young child, I remember having thoughts. I grew up in the Bronx in New York City. So if there's any New Yorkers out there, here's a shout out to New York. So I grew up in New York in the Bronx, and in my mind, I felt like I wanted something more. You know, I recognized that, you know, growing up in the Bronx, it didn't have much. And I was also told by the powers that be at that time, the parents, that, you know, there's something more out there, and there's something to make you happy out there. And for me, in my mind, that something was moving out of the Bronx, and it was really materialistic. It was about money. So there was always a search in my mind for something. And the search for this happiness was symbolized in money. So much of my growing up, I fantasized and thought about money a lot, or abundance a lot. This search for happiness led me to chase career. So for much of my life, I was chasing career, trying to find happiness through money. At some point, I recognized, and I think we all recognize, that money isn't going to bring us happiness. But there was still this search, this desire to know happiness. Yet there was a recognition that money wasn't going to bring it there, because money did come into my experience. I eventually had the things that I wanted. So I thought my happiness was going to come from relationships. And so I sought out a lot of relationships. I've been in a lot of relationships, and perhaps as many of you who can relate, who's been in relationships. And what I found in my relationships is that they would start off very promising, but I would hit a point or hit an experience where they were no longer fulfilling. Something was lost, seemingly lost. And so the relationships themselves weren't enough. So I couldn't find my happiness in relationship, I couldn't find it in money, and I couldn't find it in career. So then I looked for it in sex and drugs. And so much of my earlier 30s was exploring sex and drugs. So that was a part of my life. And that search, needless to say, also had a dead end. So I couldn't find it in money, I couldn't find it in relationships, I could not find it in sex and drugs. So eventually, and I think we all come to this point where we start to recognize that this search for happiness, not only is it exhausting, but it's quite honestly depressing, because we recognize, after chasing happiness in everything, we recognize we really cannot find it for more than a brief experience. So I had a great time when I was doing drugs, brief experience. I had a great time in these honeymoon experiences, in these relationships, but it was a brief experience. Money was great when you get the new car, when you move into a new house, when you have nice clothes, but it's a brief experience. So the search always led me to these brief experiences. And really what the heart was calling for was for a whole experience of wholeness. And it would be the ideas or spiritual principles that were introduced to me that would kind of lure me in, because I've exhausted everything. Of Course in Miracles says that we are capable of much procrastination, and we can endure a lot of pain, but we do have limits. And so I had reached my limit, and so my mind was now open to something else, another way. And thankfully, by the grace of God and the grace of life itself, I had been led to many spiritual teachings. I remember reading for the first time the Celestine Prophecies, if anybody remembers that book. I would then be led to Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now. I would do self-development courses, and I would be invested in the metaphysical teachings of the law of attraction. And so all these spiritual teachings had come into my experience, and they gave me or offered me a promise of happiness, of discovering and finding happiness. And they were all very perfect, because most of them, if not all of them, brought my attention from the outside world into this inner experience. So whether it be the teachings of Eckhart Tolle, which brought attention to the thoughts of the mind, or the teachings of the law of attraction and manifesting, which again brought attention into within and what was in mind. But even still, and by the way, I had a lot of what I considered and still considered success in the realm of manifesting during that time period. A lot of things that I held in mind as desired and what I wanted did come into my experience. I remember having, this manifesting this idea of, having the Hollywood Hill, living in the Hollywood Hills and having a house there. I would soon find a partner who lived in the Hollywood Hills, and I'd move to the Hollywood Hills. I would have this idea of how much money I wanted to make in a particular job, and sure enough, I would get a job and the pay would match what I had in mind or be more. So there was a lot of success with that. But again, I was hitting this wall in which it was temporary. So everything that I had wanted was coming to me, but it was still temporary. And then A Course in Miracles came into my experience. And that was about 10 years ago. And at first, for most of you or some of you who know my story, at first, like many people, I didn't want to do the course. I owned the course, I bought it, I was inspired by someone who had quoted the course. The quote was, there is no order of difficulty in miracles. And I thought, wow, that was a great quote. Let me go out and buy the book. I went out, and sure enough, the book was right in front of me, and I bought it. I took it home. I read all these concepts about Jesus and the Holy Spirit, and I thought, I am not doing another Bible. That is not my interest. I do not want to do the Bible. It felt like the Bible to me. I grew up Catholic, so I had my own preconceived notions about what Christianity was, and so I wasn't going to do the course. And this was around the time where all these spiritual teachings were landing in front of me. But for whatever reason, I put it down and I came back to it. And I came back to it with a sense of willingness to see it differently, because I kept seeing it in my experiences as I was exploring different spirituality or different spiritual teachings. So I've heard many people talk about how David Hawkins in his books talks about A Course in Miracles. Tony Robbins talks about A Course in Miracles. Wayne Dyer talks about A Course in Miracles. So if everybody's talking about A Course in Miracles, it must be that there's some value in this book that I've been avoiding. And so I eventually would do A Course in Miracles. And the profound teaching of A Course in Miracles, or the teaching of A Course in Miracles that really struck me, that was very different from everything up until that point that I had experienced as far as spiritual teachings is concerned, is that the core of the Course is telling us that there's nothing to search for. Now, mind you, my entire life I had been searching for happiness. I had been searching for something. Eventually, I was also searching for enlightenment. But the essence or the core of the Course was telling me that, in fact, there was nothing to get. And there was nothing that could be gotten that would give me what I was searching for. Why? Because what I was searching for, I already had. Which infers, or the implication is basically the search itself was the cause for my suffering. It was the cause of this lack that I was feeling. And that lack was really what I was trying to fill when I was searching for it, in the search for money, in the search in relationships, in the search for career. There was something missing that I had to fulfill. What I've come to recognize or realize is that that feeling of lack, which is also a feeling of unworthiness, a feeling of guilt, a feeling of not enough, that feeling is inherent in the idea or the belief that I am, what I am, is limited to this body. So the sense of lack is born out of the belief that I'm limited to this body. And so what the Course is teaching, its overarching message, now it says a lot of things in this book. There are thousands of pages, 500,000 words, I've been told. I haven't counted myself, but I've been told 500,000 words. And The simplicity of the message is simply that I am not who I've taken myself to be. I've taken myself to be this limited person, and by believing that, I have this sense of lack for which needs to be fulfilled, in which case I search the world to fill a void that's really non-existent. And so the Course was basically saying, no, you have everything. In fact, what you're looking for is looking for you. You are simply seeing it wrong, is what I took, or what I take from the Course. So the Course is saying you are simply seeing who you are. You're seeing the world incorrectly. It's not, I use the word wrong, but I want to make sure there's no guilt in this. It's an impersonal accident, if you will, that has taken place. And this impersonal accident that has taken place is I've misperceived myself to be something that I'm not. The Course is saying we are children of God, which means we are extensions of Source. And by the way, I will use a lot of symbols to point at what I'm trying to extend. I won't limit myself to the symbols of the Course. So what I'm trying to say is I may use the word God, I may use the word Source, I may use the word love. They all mean the same thing. They all point to a definitionless creator. And so the Course is saying we are sons of God, we are extensions of Source. We are not this limited, separate body. We are not separate. And so as I look back at all my fears and all my struggles and all my hurts, I recognize that at the cornerstone of all of that is simply the belief that I'm separate. And when I suffer, I believe that to be true. So when I don't have enough money to pay the bills, I'm separate from abundance. When I feel lonely, I'm separate from life. I'm separate from love. When I feel guilty, I am separate from life. I am separate from love. When I feel like I have to struggle, I am separate from success. And so it has been a revelatory experience in many ways, A Course in Miracles, for me, because the miracle, which is really what A Course in Miracles is a course in shifting our perception from the misperception of who we thought we were, which is this limited body, to the wholeness, which lacks nothing. This wholeness that lacks nothing is the Holy Spirit. It is the wholeness, the Holy Spirit. That is what we are. We are the wholeness. We are everything. In a confused state of mind, we've taken ourselves to be a separate body, separate person in which we suffer. And so what the Course was telling me was something so much deeper than any teaching of the law of attraction. It was teaching me something much deeper than simply the concepts that it was laying out. I mean, A Course in Miracles has a lot of concepts in which it uses to awaken our mind, but at the core of what it's teaching, the depth of it, for me at the time, and still today as I share with you, is a game changer, because it changes the world. It changes the way I see the world and experience in the world. And it's that experience, it is that wholeness and that experience for which inspires me to want to share and give. What has been shared with me, I want to share and give. And so today I look forward to sharing and giving, because I also recognize in the wholeness, we are not separate. So although there's an appearance of separation, in which case I'm behind a camera here in Hawaii and you're out there, although there's an appearance of that, there is a depth and breadth, depth and breadth to this moment that underlies that perception. In other words, there's an experience wherever you are listening to this. There's an experience for which you and I, all of us, share in despite the appearances of separation. And so this time together is about fostering this experience in our awareness, and so that our conviction is built on what and who we truly are, which is we want to know ourselves as the Son of God. We want to know ourselves as the Holy Spirit. We want to know ourselves as whole. And so in this experience, our means is basically a practice. And so Course in Miracles and the principles that it shares is a set of concepts and principles for which we can apply to the mind. And as we apply these, in my experience, as I've applied these, the conviction has been built, and experience has been given to me, to all of us really, experience is given to all of us, to strengthen our idea of who and what we are. And that's really what A Course in Miracles is here to do. A Course in Miracles in the Course says that it aims at bringing about a revelatory experience. That's what it's aiming to do, to build our conviction in what's true. Sometimes it feels like we are 90% convicted that we are a body and 10% spirit. Sometimes it feels like we're convicted 50% of the time that we're spirit and 50% we're the body. We want to be at 100%. We want a complete healing of the shared mind. And so until that healing occurs, which has already happened, until that becomes in our awareness, until it's in our awareness, we're here to heal. And so this is an extension of that healing. This is an expression of our healing together. So that is my story. That is really what I've come into with A Course in Miracles and what I aim to share today. A quick synopsis for those of you who are not familiar with A Course in Miracles. I've already talked a lot about it, but I'm going to add some more. And it is simply in this one statement in A Course in Miracles, and I'm sure all of you who are familiar with A Course in Miracles are familiar with this quote. And the quote is simply, "Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Therein lies the peace of God." Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. So this statement makes a distinction between what is real and what is unreal. Nothing real can be threatened. Who and what we are cannot be threatened because it's whole. Nothing unreal exists. Anything that changes can't be true. So nothing in perception could be true. Nothing in perception really exists. And so our safety really lies in the unchanging. And so just to bring it back to what the aim is really to come back to recognize ourselves as the unchanging. And that is what A Course in Miracles offers. From my perspective, the Course is a very non-dualistic teaching. It is dualistic, let me repeat that. It is dualistic in the symbols that it uses, but its aim is for a non-dual experience. A Course in Miracles says it is a journey without distance. So if what I'm talking about is a journey without distance, then it must be we have nowhere to go. If A Course in Miracles says that it's a journey without distance, then it must be there's nowhere to go, which means that what we want or what we're seeking is right here. Right here, even as you sit in front of your screen, and I sit in front of this camera and screen, and the words are coming through my mouth and the words are speaking, what I'm seeking is here. However, if that isn't in my awareness, then it only means that something is blocking it from my awareness. A Course in Miracles says it doesn't aim at teaching love, but rather it aims at helping us remove the blocks to the awareness of love's presence, which is always right here and now. So that's really what the course is about. It's about bringing us to an experience. It's about helping us remove the blocks to the awareness of love's presence. It is a course in miracles, and it's important we talk briefly also about miracles before I continue, because the best, in my opinion, the best definition of A Course in Miracles comes from the workbook, where it says a miracle is correction. A miracle is correction. It does not create nor really change at all. A miracle is correction, nor does it change anything at all. It merely looks on devastation and reminds the mind that what it sees is false. The miracle does nothing. It reminds the mind that what it sees is false. So what is the mind seeing that's false? Well, I just mentioned it a couple of moments ago. What the mind sees that's false is that we are separate bodies, and that we are separate people, and that we've separated from source. That perception is false. The miracle shifts that perception. So in a moment where we think we are separate from abundance, with the mind open to the miracle, that perception gets shifted into a perception for which we recognize that what we need or what we have is with us. So we're no longer separate from abundance. When we think we're separate from love or we're feeling lonely, the miracle is simply a shift in perception, in which case we see our current experience where we're separate differently. The mind's open to a correction. So that's all a miracle is. It's a shift in perception. In reality, the miracle does nothing. It is just simply helping us see things right, because our problems have already been solved. We have never separated from source. We are never without all of what we need. We are never in danger. But if that isn't what we're seeing, then we must have our seeing corrected, our perception corrected. So we ask for a miracle. So that is really what a miracle is, a shift in perception. So if anybody has any questions, I invite you to go ahead and ask it. In a short moment, I'm just going to go into the next part, which is really the heart of today's presentation, which are the 7 miracle-minded teachings from A Course in Miracles. So the first miracle-minded teaching that I'm here to share with you is purpose. A Course in Miracles says what shares a common purpose is the same. What shares a common purpose is the same. In my experience, what I've come to recognize is that the world is going to serve us in one of 2 ways. Either the world is going to serve to further define us as a separate person, or the world is going to serve to remind us of our wholeness, depending on what purpose we give the world. Unconsciously, as I shared before, in my experience, I used the world to define who I am. And so how did I use the world to define who I am? Well, we're trained. I remember when I was young, I must have been 8 or 9 years old, I had no thought of it when my stepmother at the time asked me, what are you going to be when you grow up? And I remember thinking to myself, like, what am I going to be when I'm going to grow up? Like, I'm like 8 or 9 years old. I'm like that had not even entered my mind, this idea that I'm going to create that experience, and that I needed to find out what I needed to do or be when I grow up at that age. And so I remember asking me that question, and really it was a question of how are you going to define yourself in the world? What was under that question, as well as she was asking me, because then I told her, I said, oh, I wanted to be an actor, I wanted to be a dancer, I wanted to be, she gave me this look like, that's not how you, she didn't say these words, but what was being communicated was that's not how you define yourself in this world. You can't define yourself as an actor or a dancer. No, that won't take you anywhere. It doesn't make money. And of course, money was on my mind at that age as well. And so there was immediate disapproval. And so then I thought, oh, well, then how do I define myself? What is it that I'm to be? And I remember her saying, you got to be, a doctor, a lawyer, architect. I got excited about architect because at least it felt like there was some creativity there. And so we're trained as young children that we are to define ourselves in the world. And so we buy into the beliefs of the world, and we are indoctrinated by the thinking of the world, which for the most part is the thinking of separation. And so unconsciously, we assign the role of the world a part in this drama of defining us. We're defined by our social class, our income, our friends, our political views, everything that we have judgment on basically in this world defines us. A purpose, which is the reason for which something exists. A purpose is simply a reason for which something exists. So if the purpose of the world is to define us, then that is what the world will represent and symbolize. However, we could never be what the world has defined us as. Why? Because what we are in truth cannot really be denied or escaped. We cannot escape the truth of our wholeness. So there will always be tension in my experience as long as I think I'm defining myself by the world and its rules. The purpose of the world will either serve to define you or free you. There's a new purpose of the world. And this is a new purpose that the Course introduces, and it is a purpose for which stabilizes perception, which stabilizes experience, which stabilizes my identity. And that purpose is simply peace. Now, what does that mean? When our purpose is peace, and when we've assigned the world the purpose of peace, what does it mean? Well, A Course in Miracles teaches us that we are whole, we are complete, we are loved, that the only thing that can create an experience that's different from what we truly are is a block, is a misperception. So if we now use the world for the purpose of peace, then what we are really doing is using the world to help expose what's blocking love in our experience. So with a new way of looking at the world and using it for the purpose of peace, the world now serves simply to say, hey, this is where you're stuck. You see that charge that you just got when someone cut you off? Or you see that charge you just got when you didn't trust your brother? Every time there's something that charges me, or anytime I feel that I'm at the effect of the world, and I can only feel like I'm at the effect of the world when I feel like I'm separate from the world. So anytime that arises in me, then that is the world or the mind or the symbol of the world reflecting back to me, this is what you need to look at. This judgment here. To be defined by the world is to take up its worldly roles and feel like you're making your way through it. Most of us feel like we're making our way through a world. What this teaching is offering or saying is basically you're not making your way through the world. The world is actually making its way through your mind. Because remember, we're whole, so it must be that the world itself is in us. The scope and magnitude of what we truly are holds everything. And so we can now use this perception of the world as a means to uncover what is blocking us within. To allow the world to free you is to allow the world to show you where love remains blocked. This requires that it be assigned one purpose, and that purpose is peace. And now that I recognize that the world's purpose is peace, everything, every symbol, everything that comes into my experience is given the purpose of peace. With the purpose laid out in front of me, that's my purpose. With the purpose laid out in front of me, then there's no way that I cannot come into the recognition of my purpose, because that is the purpose I've assigned it. A Course in Miracles uses this idea of asking everything that we do in the world, asking, what is it for? And so that is a practice for me, is what is it for? Why am I doing X, Y, and Z? Why am I making a decision to purchase this? Why am I making a decision to act this way? Why am I making a decision to do this or that? How does it support my purpose? And so it is training the mind to see stability, to see purpose in everything being peace. There is no stability in the world. Nothing in the world is stable. And that's why we can't find happiness in the world, because everything's always changing, including our idea of ourselves. When we are allowing the world to define us, when we think we're this person, when we think we're separate, when we think we're a body, that idea of ourselves will change. It'll change on a physical level. I certainly look a lot different than I did 20 years ago. Got all this gray coming out here. You can't see it probably up here, but there's a lot of grays here. So on a physical level, we change. How we think of ourselves changes over the course of my life. There are moments where I thought of myself a certain way, and that shifts. And so the purpose, being peace, is to stabilize our idea of ourself, and the world, which is ourself. The world is not separate from us, is peace. So that what we see is peace. Recognize ourselves. Through this training, the purpose always being peace, we are building conviction in the mind of what we truly are. And so how do we use this? Again, we're recognizing the charges that come up in our experience in life. So one of the questions that is helpful, and as I go through each one of these teachings, I have a question that we can ask ourselves to begin to open up and look at what are we holding on to for which can be looked at and healed. And so the question is what beliefs do I have about the world that causes upset or causes a charge in me? So I ask everybody who's listening to me right now to ask themselves honestly, what do they believe? What do you believe? What do we believe? What are we holding about the world that causes upset and or charge in us? It may be something in regards to politics. Do we get charged when we see, Trump, or maybe we get charged when we see Bernie Sanders speaking? I don't know. When we watch politics, are we charged? Oh, I get charged when I see Trump. Okay. Well, then what that brings to my mind, or what that helps me recognize, is that I have judgment against Trump, which means I'm defining myself by judging Trump. I'm defining myself as something different than Trump. I'm assuming an identity. So the judgment serves so that I can assume an identity of superiority or innocence at the expense of his guilt. And I recognize that that belief held in place keeps this insistence that I'm a body. It keeps or holds on to this insistence that I'm limited to this body. So do I want to hold this judgment against Trump? No. As far as morality is concerned, what gets us upset about morals in the world? What gets us upset about relationships in the world? What charges us about finances in the world? What charges us about religion in a world? All these things need to be looked at, but can be looked at with the Holy Spirit. I've said we are the Holy Spirit. So when I say we look at it with the Holy Spirit, we're looking at it with the aspect of ourselves that is capable of non-judgment. which is capable of looking at these beliefs with an intention or purpose of peace. So we've only asked us, or we're only being asked at this point to look at them. So purpose has to be peace. When we recognize this faulty thinking, the question that we're left with is, are we willing to let it go? Which brings us to the next miracle-minded teaching, which is willingness. James asks, is letting go of judgments called compassion and acceptance? Yes, absolutely. When I have a judgment serves to create an experience of separation. Whenever there's judgment, there has to be two positions, that which is perceiving and judging and that which is being judged. So there has to be an experience of separation when there's judgment. You cannot have judgment without an experience of separation. The mind seems to believe that it can judge without affecting the perception of yourself, but that's not true. Every time we judge, we're actually insistent, or we're being insistent on who we are. When I judge you, I'm defining who I am. This is important to note, because when we get really excited about, a political side to be on, and not that there's anything wrong with being on a political side, I must say that. This is not about behavior, and this isn't about doing anything wrong. And this is key, because the ego, from the perspective of what wants to remain separate, it will hear something that maybe I share or something spiritual, and it will draw a conclusion or assumption. So when I make mention that when we take position or we judge something and we are creating an experience of separation for ourselves, I'm not saying that that is wrong and we should feel guilty for it. I'm just bringing into awareness of what's happening. And then ultimately, we are left with the decision of what feels good and what doesn't. And if judgment drops, then great. And yes, it is a form of compassion and acceptance when the judgment drops, because when the judgment drops, then we fall into an experience, we embody an experience of wholeness. When we are happy, in our happiest moments, when we feel connected, when we feel joined with our brothers or with someone else, there's no judgment in that. There is an openness and a complete acceptance. There's a basking, if you will. It's like, take me. When you're really happy, it's like, take me. Well, what are we taking? We're taking away the idea of a separate self. And in those experiences, we really don't have a conscious awareness of our separate self. When we're our happiest, we're not thinking of our body. We're not thinking about time. We're engulfed in experience. And so, yes, letting go of judgments, all judgments, is a form of compassion and acceptance and a recognition of our connection and connectivity to all that is. But we must be willing to look at what we are holding as true. We don't have to get rid of it. That is not our job. That is not our function. Our function is not to get rid of it. Our function is simply to stay on purpose, which is peace. Be willing. Course in Miracles uses this word willing very often throughout the text. Willing is to cheerfully consent to or go along with. Course in Miracles says your willingness to recognize the truth depends on your willingness to question everything. There's an openness to question everything. Every thought we're holding. I just mentioned that the thought system of the ego is such that it likes to assume and conclude. And it is in the belief in that assumption and conclusion that we get confused in who and what we are. We take the voice of the ego as reality. But that isn't reality. That is simply thoughts that have been identified with. They're just thoughts. Everything is just thoughts. And so the willingness is simply to be wrong about what we thought those thoughts were and the power that those thoughts have. So willingness is our opportunity. That is the way we show up to life. And life is always teaching us, but we have to be willing to see it from the perspective of wanting to be taught. We have to want to be shown something different in order for something different to show up. I'll give you a quick story. I was cooking in the kitchen the other day, and I was making pancakes. You would have loved them. They were really, really fluffy and good. But anyways, so I'm making pancakes. And part of making pancakes for a lot of people is I have to stack them. And so while my pancakes are stacked and I'm making more, it's important to keep them warm. And so I had them on a dish that was sitting over a stove. And I had the stove on, just warming up the dish and the pancakes. And so my partner says to me, you know, you're going to break that dish if that's too hot. You should check it out and make sure that, you know, your flame isn't too hot. Otherwise, you're going to break the dish. And my reaction was, I know what I'm doing. Don't. My kitchen, I'm cooking. Don't. And so in that moment of, I know what I'm doing, I block, I constrict new information. I don't allow, I'm not willing to be open to life, basically. My partner, as much as anything else in the world, is part of me. I'm whole. So that's me saying something to me. So am I willing to listen? And it has less to do with the words and more to do with, am I willing to drop this self-importance? Am I willing to drop this need to be relevant? If I don't know something, somehow there's a thought that I'm not relevant. So don't tell me how to cook. Don't tell me how to warm up my pancakes. Don't make me irrelevant. And so, of course, what happened? I didn't listen, and I broke the plate. I went to pick up the pancake. Actually, I didn't even have to pick up the pancakes. It was just like kind of like just blew up there, and it was in pieces under the pancake. And then, if that isn't bad enough, of course, I was too proud to say that he was right and that I should have listened or been open to what was being given to me. I tried to sneak and hide the broken dishes so that he wouldn't find out. That was another way of maintaining and keeping secret what had happened and the judgment on myself. So why do I share that? I share that only to bring home the point that willingness is about recognizing that what we are seeing is may not be what we think it is in every situation that we're suffering. In fact, I will go as far as to say in every situation that we believe we are suffering, we are not seeing things right. In order to be shown what is true in truth, we have to be willing to be wrong about what it is that we're seeing. We have to be willing to allow a new thought to emerge in awareness. Every problem stems from faulty thinking. Our willingness to give up the faulty thinking is necessary for a new thought to emerge. As long as we're insistent that we know what's best, we know what's going on, that what we perceive is actually happening, as long as we insist that that is true, then what is actually true cannot make itself evident. To be wrong about being at the effect of the world and what we believe the world to be is necessary to be at the effect of truth. The Course is telling us that we are not a separate body. It's very clear. The Course says you are not a body. as my friend Earl Purdy, when I interviewed him for my movie in A Course in Miracles, Enlightenment or Bust, he shared about understanding and accepting, mentioning that acceptance is to understand. So when we hear something, you are not a body, or I am not a body, there's nothing to understand. We clearly know what that means. The question is, do we accept it as true? Are we willing to accept it as true? And the feedback that the world provides will indicate to us whether or not we accept that as true. If we are in fear, then we are not accepting that that is true. When we are in fear, we are holding on to the idea of our vulnerability. Much of what my movie, A Course in Miracles, Enlightenment or Bust, is about stepping into our fear or our vulnerability. Because it is only by stepping into the direction of what we fear that we come to recognize that there's nothing to fear. In other words, we have to step into our invulnerability to come to know, we have to step into our vulnerability to come to know our invulnerability. How else would we know who we are if we weren't embodying and acting on who we are? And the movie really demonstrates, a lot of people who've seen my movie may think that my movie is about leaving the world or leaving a job. Those are all things that the character in the movie does, but it's really not about leaving the world and leaving the job. The movie is really simply about following inspiration, which may be leaving a job or moving or whatever, what have you. It may look different for everybody, but the teaching itself is really about listening to the heart, being willing to step into what previously may have caused fear or seemingly have been fearful. And so we're following inspiration. And so I ask you to contemplate, what about the world do we find difficult to willingly accept? What are the injustices in the world? What are the people, the circumstances, and the outcomes for which we find difficult to willingly accept? Where are we not going along with life? That's really what going along with this inspiration is about. Inspiration is going along with life. Remember, we are whole. We are part of life. We've never separated from life, and we will never separate from life. Life is really one movement, and we are a part of that one movement. We are not an independent movement in this one movement. We are part of the one movement, the whole. And so when we are holding back from that one movement, then we will have an experience of fear. We're not wanting to go along with life. And so the way that shows up in our experience is we don't accept. We don't accept circumstances. We don't accept certain, what we perceive as injustices. We don't accept things that are happening in the world. And again, there's nothing wrong with not accepting something that's not happening in the world, but recognize that it is in the not accepting where we suffer. So the willingness is to be wrong about how we see and view everything. And as we question ourselves as to what we are unwilling to accept in the world, we recognize an opportunity to ask for a miracle, for our perception to be shifted. But this inquiry really requires us to question everything. Why do we want to question everything? Well, we want to question everything because for our unconscious life, which is most of our life until we awaken, we've believed life to be a certain way. And so we have to come out of that indoctrination, which leads me to the next miracle-minded teaching, which is the happy learner. James says fear does not exist now, only in the past and future. Thank you, James. Yes, there is never anything to fear now. Fear shows up in response to something of the future or something in the past. That is very true, yes. Never now. The truth is, and I always say this, is you're always okay. There's never been a moment in time, if we're going to use time, that you haven't been okay. Even in our most difficult situations. And we've all had difficult situations. Death, in my experience, death, drug abuse, breakups, horrible relationship breakups, family problems and challenges, all through all of this. And we've all had this, or have this experience show up. Through it all, there's something that is unwavering and unchanging. There's something that is always okay. And so thank you, James, for pointing that out, because what being pointed out is that's something that is always okay and unchangeable, which seems to lie behind the eyes. There's an awareness, a definitionless awareness or space that seems to lie behind the eyes. That is unchanging. In fact, it doesn't age, it doesn't move, it doesn't worry, it does nothing. That therein lies our portal to what we're searching for. And so this is simply coming back to that which is abstract and definitionless. And we come back to that by removing the blocks. And so we set purpose. A purpose is peace. We have this willingness to be wrong about how we're viewing things. And now I'm about to go into being the happy learner. But before I do so, I want to answer Christy's question, which asks, how do we find ourselves accepting the course's premises and also witness to torture, abuse, poverty, etc.? It feels like I'm embracing truth, but also slightly splitting my personality. Do we ignore, accept the seeming atrocities of the illusory world? Please help me explain how you approach this. This is a great question. This is the tough one. This is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. So how do we find ourselves accepting the course's premises and also witnessing torture? Okay. So when we witness torture, abuse, and poverty, okay, the witnessing is showing up in our mind. In other words, even as we are talking about it right now, torture, abuse, and poverty, as it is shown in mind, when it is in our mind in thought, it is our reality. So whether we see it on TV, whether we read about it in the newspaper, whether we know someone, as long as those images and ideas are in mind, and it is what we see, it is in thought, and we see it as separate from us, then we will suffer. And the suffering comes to mind because we see it as something, we've judged against it. And remember, every judgment we have is to define ourselves. So we're judging against this abuse, we're judging against this torture, and we're judging against it to define ourselves as something separate from it. And in most cases, we define ourselves separate from it, and somehow so we resist it. But the suffering isn't from the suffering that we experience isn't from the abuse or the torture. It is actually coming from the thoughts we're holding in mind. It's our interpretation of what's happening. We don't want to see it. It is a part. Remember, we're whole. There's nothing separate from us. So if we perceive something, we say it's out there, and we resist it, we will suffer. Because we are accepting ourselves as separate from it. And that is what's showing up in perception. Yes, I recognize that. And this is why I say it's the tough part. Because then the next question is, how do I ignore it? Well, this isn't about ignoring it. Definitely not about ignoring it. But the way to heal it is not going to be in the world. So what tends to happen when we see these atrocities is we try to heal ourselves about it, heal ourselves of it by thinking we need to go out and fix it, or thinking we need to feel bad about it. Wayne Dyer always used to say, or I remember Wayne Dyer talking about how you can't be sick enough to heal the sick. You can't be poor enough to save the poor. So in the same manner, we cannot take on the guilt and the negative feelings about it. So then the next question is, who am I not to feel bad about these atrocities? Gary Renard said to me, he says, Jesus would say, who are you not to be at peace? Your right is to be at peace. So feeling guilty, feeling angry about those atrocities is not the answer. So it's really about seeing differently. So again, the question is, how do we ignore? So we're not going to ignore it. We're going to look at it and ask ourselves, what am I afraid of? I must really believe in death so much that I'm afraid, not only for me, but for others. And this is what I'm seeing. Help me see it differently. What's real in this moment? So it's a willingness to just see it different. This isn't something to be intellectually understood. The mind that is perceiving it cannot intellectually understand the reality. It is simply a willingness to let it go. The wholeness of it, the Holy Spirit, is what is responsible for transforming it. Now, I'm going to take this a little deeper because I feel to. The essence of life, or the essence of duality, is such that life and death must appear. In other words, you cannot have life and death must appear in the way it appears in the world of birth and death. To have an experience of duality, you have to have birth and death. In other words, life is always going to have destruction. Life is always going to have death. We cannot avoid it. That is embedded in this belief of separation. Our judgment, though, is constantly that we want to avoid it. And, we have judgment against death. Now, again, the ego would conclude, wait a second, if you don't have a judgment against death, then it must be that you're for death. And that is not what I'm saying. I'm simply saying that life, if we look out, is filled with destruction and birth, and it's not what we think it is. In other words, I can look outside my window and I can see a tree, and in the life of what's happening in the tree, there is destruction. The leaves eventually fall, but the leaves fall and decompose into the grass, which feeds the grass and the microorganisms that work underneath the root that help keep the tree alive. I work in the garden a lot, so I get to witness this whole circle of life firsthand. I have the chicken poop in the grass or whatever, and I cycle it and I put it with the compost, and all of this, everything is working together. And in this world, you can't have one without the other. The dualistic nature of this world is such as you can't have the saint without the sinner. You cannot have birth without death. So the whole idea of death is a huge healing opportunity for all of us, and to see it differently. Because again, what is the Course saying? Nothing real can be threatened. Who we truly are, what we are, is real. It really is real. But I can't convince anybody of that. That has to be a recognition that we come into. And so these miracle teachings are aimed at opening up the mind in such a way in which those recognitions can begin to take place. And they already have been. We wouldn't be here having that discussion. So thank you very much for that question. Thank you very much for that question, which leads into this idea of being the happy learner. The happy learner is to look at, what are we afraid at looking at? To be a happy learner is to be the fearless learner. So can we together as a group look at our beliefs about torture and death and so forth? So being the happy learner is willing to look at what we don't typically want to look at. We've convinced ourselves in this thought system of separation, we've been indoctrinated and convinced ourselves that there is something to get out of the world that is going to fulfill us. And so we want to hold on to the ways of the world. We want to hold on to the ways of the world. And so to be the happy learner is to look at the ways we've been holding on to the world or thinking about the world and being willing to have them transformed. And what we ultimately learn, or what we begin to see as we embody this idea of the happy learner, is we also begin to see that the thought system, in order to hold on to the ways of the world, it must compromise itself. In other words, our true identity as whole and complete, loved, peaceful bliss, our true identity has to be compromised to have this experience of separation, or to have an experience or belief in the world. And so the question that I ask everyone to think about is, where in our lives are we compromising? And this was a big one for me, because when I started to ask myself, where am I compromising? I began to see that I was compromising in a lot of areas in my life. I was compromising in relationships when I held back from doing what I wanted to do because, oh, I'm in a relationship, I can't do that, or I can't be a part of that, or I have to do something I don't want to do. Where am I compromising at work? I know at work, I remember I used to hold back in expressing what I thought. I would compromise on my feelings. I would self-sacrifice. And so being the happy learner is really questioning every place for which we justify an experience of hurt, justify an experience of disappointment, justify an experience that is other than peace. So where are we compromising in our experience? And whatever comes to mind is coming up for the purpose of healing, for the purpose of looking at. And when we look at these thoughts, we're not looking at the thoughts to do something about it. We're simply looking at the thoughts without judgment, which brings me to the next miracle teaching, which is forgiveness. And this really is the central teaching of A Course in Miracles. Forgiveness looks, waits, and judges not. I love that. That is the best definition I can think of from the Course. And there's a lot of different places where the Course talks about forgiveness. But for me, forgiveness looks, waits, and judges not. What is sin except the false idea about God's Son? What is sin but the false idea of God's Son, which means the false idea that I'm separate from God? Forgiveness merely looks, sees its falsity, and therefore lets it go. Before I continue, I just want to read a question James asks. So compromising is not being honest, not an integrity, not being self-reliant. Yes, beautifully said. Thank you, James. Yes, when we are compromising, we are not being consistent with who we are in truth. We are not being consistent with life and the call of life. And so when we are inconsistent with the call of life, so we're not flowing, we're not in the flow with life, then life itself will reflect back that inconsistency and confirm the core belief, which is I'm a person. And so how does the world reflect back the core belief that I'm a person? Well, it reflects it back with images and perception of sickness, images and perception of a separation, of hurt relationships. Emma, conflict, thinking one thing but doing another. Thank you, beautifully said. Yeah, there's conflict when we compromise. And so forgiveness, stepping into the next miracle teaching, looks, waits, and judges not. So whenever we're in fear, atonement, the correction is our own responsibility. So what are we responsible for? Our responsibility is simply to forgive. What does that mean? So often there's confusion about forgiveness. When we really look at the definition of forgiveness, which says looks, waits, and judges not, when we really look at what that says or what's being said, then we also recognize what is it within us right now? What is it within us? What is the shared experience or the awareness within us that looks without judgment? There's actually an experience for which I'm pointing to right now. There's a definitionless awareness that is unchanging, and I referred to it a few moments ago. That's unchanging. Thomas says the light displaying the movie on the screen does not judge the movie. Exactly. Thank you. So what is here right now as you are listening to my words, or listening to the words that are not even mine, listening to the words, what is here that sees that and does not judge or react to it? Now, there may be a judgment or a thought to what's being said, but that's not what I'm pointing to. I'm not pointing to the thought. What is it that sees? When we recognize that which sees, the light, as Thomas was saying, the light displaying the movie does not judge the movie. The light that sees, the essence or the definitionless awareness that is always here with us. It never goes. It can never not be here with us. That forgives. It looks, waits, and judges not. So what we're being asked to do is simply allow ourselves to be embodied by the awareness, to be embodied, to be engulfed by the awareness. We're not asked to be the ones who forgive. This is so important. And, it's so important because so many times I've talked to people who say, I've done the forgiveness work, I'm forgiving, and it's beautiful. That has its place. Our willingness to step up to the table and say, I'm willing to forgive and I want to forgive, that has its place. But let's go a little bit deeper to come into the recognition that the person actually never forgives. Why? Because the person cannot forgive. Because really what's in the position of forgiveness just looks, waits, and judges not. That is the Holy Spirit. That is the Holy Spirit in you. Course in Miracles says the Holy Spirit is in you, literally in you. So that definitionlessness, awareness, is what forgives. It doesn't see a problem because it doesn't judge against anything. The thought or the thinking mind is what's judging, and the thought and the thinking mind that thinks it's separate, the person, really does not forgive, although in the way this is playing out, in the way that we are awakening, it appears as if the person is taking the first step. And in some ways, and in many ways, we can argue that that is true, that the person is seemingly taking the first step. But eventually, as the mind is unwinding and as the mind is ascending, it can see from a higher perspective that in fact, it was always grace in charge. So forgiveness does nothing. And it is in an instant forgiveness. It doesn't take time, although it appears like a process in the beginning. But it doesn't have to remain a process as our mind is opened and as our mind is ascending. Now, our mind isn't really going anywhere. I use this idea of ascension. It's part of the theme of today, which is SOAR. When we think about this idea of soaring, there is an implied freedom. When we think of SOAR, the word SOAR does mean to ascend. And so this spiritual journey, and I'm digressing a little bit right now, but the spiritual journey is not a linear journey. We often think, I know for me, in my mind, being on this path, this seeming path, the path takes the shape of a timeline. And so when I first was introduced to A Course in Miracles, it is a timeline. There's 365 days of lessons. And so there is a timeline for which the Course offers. What I'm also making mention of is that timeline, again, as the mind is ascending, we willingly take on the timeline to undo the timeline. As the mind is ascending, we recognize that, in fact, forgiveness, as we thought of it as a process, is in fact not a process at all. It is instant, and it is in the holy presence. Thank you, Laura. It is here. It is this. And I will digress again to come back to the point that I made earlier, which is nothing is missing. None of us have to work. Although it appears that way, in reality, none of us has to work at what we are. What we are is whole, complete, without suffering. What we are is everything that we've ever wanted. And yes, it comes with experiences of bliss. It comes with the joy. It comes with a recognition, the only recognition, quite honestly, that's worth ever really having. Rachel, full embracing without resistance. There you go. Yeah, absolutely. So forgiveness is a way of being. A way of being. So we are introduced to the idea of forgiveness very often by the idea of, I got to forgive this person, I got to forgive this situation, I got to forgive what I did in the past. And so that is a very relevant way of looking at forgiveness in the beginning. But what we begin to see or come into as we fully embrace without resistance, thank you, Rachel, we come to see is that actually forgiveness is not about forgiving things. It's really a way of being. It's a way of not judging anything. Not judging anything. My coffee's too cold. There's a judgment. It's windy and rainy outside, and I don't like it. There's a judgment. Now, it does not mean that those thoughts cannot come up. This is important. Forgiveness isn't about holding or avoiding or getting rid of thoughts we don't want. That is not our job. Our job is simply, if we had a job, is to embody this idea of non-judgment. So let the thought, so the thought comes up. My coffee is cold. It's a thought. It comes into awareness. I don't have to react to the thought, or reaction or response to the thought doesn't have to be there. In fact, when I'm just looking at the thought without judgment, then the next thing unfolds. I'm on to the next thing. I'm not living in the experience of my coffee's cold. I'm living in an experience of forgiveness where I'm just recognizing thoughts show up. That's what they do. Thomas says, shifting point of reference, preference. That's right. I was watching Muji. If anybody's been watching Muji, he's been doing some really great set songs in India. I can't pronounce the city. And he used the analogy yesterday of, we've all seen this if we've taken Psychology 101. It is that image of the two faces coming together, the two black images of two faces coming together. And then there's a vase a white base in the middle. So it's one of those images that can be looked at from 2 points of view, 2 perspectives. One in which you see 2 faces, and one in which you see the vase in the middle of the 2 faces. I remember seeing an image like that with an old woman and a young woman. So it's an image that there's 2. Now, what's interesting is when you look at these images, you can instantly flip from one to the other, but you really can't hold on to both at the same time. One comes at the cost of the other. So there's a shift in reference and perspective. And so when a thought comes to mind, that is really the shift between the attachment to the thought and the embodiment of what we truly are, which is the definitionless awareness, which simply looks. This morning, if I'm honest, I didn't want to get up. There was a thought in my mind, oh my God, it's 5:30, the sun has not come up. This is what's playing in my mind. The sun has not come up. Or last night, there was a thought, oh, I got to prepare. So the thoughts come to mind. They're allowed to be there, and we can look at it with the purpose of what? Well, the purpose of the world has been given. It's peace. So if I'm going to look at this thought that I don't want to get up in the morning, I'm going to look at it for the purpose of peace. And it's allowed to be there. Why is it allowed to be there? Because that's not what I am. I am not the story. I'm not the movie. I am the light for which judges not the movie. And in the embodiment, in the willingness to sink into that, question the truth of whether or not it's too early to wake up. Doesn't mean the thoughts are not going to be there. The other day I was working in the barn, and my partner was really, well, what could be perceived as snappy. Thought comes to mind, the willingness to be wrong about that thought, and what could have turned into a disagreement or an argument instead was responded to with, are you okay? Because when we're not judging and we're in the experience of right now, love is naturally extended from us to all things. And so the question is, are you okay? It isn't, don't get nasty with me. How dare you speak to me that way? That is interpretation based upon separation. No, this is me, and something's coming up in me. And so the response is love. Always love. Call for love. And the call for love really isn't for the other person. The call for love is for me. I don't want to feel like a separate person. Rachel says, just internal dialogue, forms that arise and dissolve. Exactly. These thoughts come into awareness and come and leave. Course in Miracles says, nothing real can be threatened, nothing unreal exists. What is unreal that exists? These thoughts. Now, we tend to think of thoughts as something that come to the mind in a literal way, like our brain and so forth. But really, everything is thought. All form is thought. All perception is thought. Everything is thought. And so, as our mind is opening up and ascending, we begin to see the world as simply thoughts. And so we're no longer responding to the world as if thoughts were real. The only reason why they feel real is because the wholeness of what we are has been narrowed to this experience, and it comes at the exclusion of the wholeness. And so our viewing is not accurate. It is very limited to the physical senses. But in reality, as our mind is opening up, we begin to realize that, in fact, not only are we more than just the body, but we're everything. Everything, and in a very literal way. Course in Miracles says, God is in everything I see because God is in my mind. We being extensions of Source, There's no part of God that we're not part of. So we are in everything as well. Consciousness itself is what we are. Being fooled, thinking that we're a body, is basically just consciousness constricting to a very narrow way of experiencing. And so with this wider scope of forgiveness, we begin to understand really the core of the message is judge not. And that's really Jesus's message, which is judge not. So the question here is, where do we hold judgment? Where are we holding judgment in our family? I used to have a lot of judgment about my brother. And of course, my judgments are going to be reflected in my engagement with my brother. That has since changed and has been healed and has been a wonderful miracle. Where do I hold judgments about my work? So many times in my work experience, I had judgments on people, on bosses, on corporations. I used to have so much judgment on corporations and how evil and bad corporations are. Now, I know there's somebody out there thinking, what do you mean they are bad? And I'm not saying I'm for corporations. All I'm saying is there's a recognition that my judgment on corporations have no effect on corporations and have every effect on me. So do I want to hold on to it? And am I willing to see it differently? And in that willingness, because my purpose is peace, and I don't want to hide or compromise my peace, I'm willing to look and judge and look on and wait and judge not. And in that, I can see there's an awareness, a spiritual vision, as the Course would mention. I can see beyond the limitation of good and bad, beyond duality. There's a recognition that, wait a second, corporations are perfect. In their own way, my experience with corporations in my work has allowed for the epiphanies. If I didn't have the experiences that I had along the way at work, as much as I thought I hated them at the time, if I didn't have that, then I wouldn't know where to look. I wouldn't come into the epiphanies, the recognition, and come into the experience of awakening. That's what this is. This is an experience of awakening. James says, absolutely. And asking, are you okay, is actually communicating that your perception that something is not okay with oneself about what was heard and seen. Beautifully said. Thank you, James. Absolutely. It's like you're responding to yourself, really, when we think we see somebody else angered or upset. That's us. That's an aspect of us. Not in a personal way. It's just life. And so showing up, are you okay, is you're asking yourself, what can I do? Is there something to be done? And so where do we hold judgments? As we recognize the judgments, we recognize the opportunity to offer it up for forgiveness. And just as James has mentioned about communicating, that brings us to our next miracle-minded teaching, is communication. This is so big. I underestimated communication for such a long time until A Course in Miracles and until I moved to Hawaii. Here we have an environment where we're open in our communication. I know there's also other Course teachers, David Hoffmeister in his communities have a rule of no private thoughts and so forth. And so what is communication? Well, let me read a Course quote that says, forgiveness lies in communication as damnation lies in guilt. Forgiveness lies in communication. So what lies in communication? What is forgiveness? Forgiveness looks, waits, and judges not. So looking, waiting, and judging not lies in communication. If that does not lie in communication, it isn't communication. And so what does that mean? Well, that means basically when the words are coming out of my mouth in such a way in which I'm judging what's being communicated, then that's not communication. Communication means to connect, commune by means of passage. And if what is coming out of my words is being judged against, then there isn't the freedom, there isn't an openness of communication. And this became very self-evident in my relationship and still serves as a practice to the best of my ability. Am I willing or am I capable of being honest about how I feel? Am I capable, open, and willing to be honest of what I want to say to you? Now, in communication, it's never about the words. It's always about the openness. In other words, I may have a communication with my partner and say, you know, I'm having thoughts that you don't care about me, or I'm having thoughts about you not valuing my opinion, or I'm having thoughts about what you do or don't do. Now, in that expression, it isn't you aren't doing something. It is simply I'm having thoughts that I don't want to hold back from you. And so in that communication, there's a willingness to look at the thoughts together. So nothing is repressed. Nothing is kept hidden or secret. There is no secret agenda. I used to always have secret agendas. I remember when I lived in, for some of you who don't know this, I moved to Los Angeles. I lived in Los Angeles for 15 years, and I went there to be an actor. And I remember the thoughts, you know, especially as an actor, it seems like the most extreme example. When you're living in Hollywood, you know, your thoughts are always about who's going to help me make it in this industry. You know, who's going to help me? Who's the producer? And so there's always a secret agenda. Sure, I'll meet with you. I'll do this. Let me be your best friend. And although that's an extreme example, in truth, we do that all the time. I mean, well, let me step back for a moment. The mind wants to convince us that there's actually something to get from other people. And so we hold back in communication by keeping things hidden. We want something, and so there's a hidden agenda. This happens in relationships all the time. We don't show our true colors because we don't want them to judge against us. Why? Because we believed ourselves as guilty. We already decided, I don't want you to look at this, or I've already judged against my thoughts to say, you know what, my thoughts are not good thoughts. In fact, I'm a bad person for having these thoughts, and so I won't share them with you, and I will keep them. And in my keeping of this secret, I hold you out. Even if it's not recognized in the physical world, in other words, I can sleep in the same bed with you and still hold you out. When we keep a secret, and in my experience, I don't know if any of you have had this experience, perhaps you have, you can be sleeping with someone and feel a world apart from them. You can be in a crowded room and feel lonely. Those experiences stem from the withholding or the judgment against our thoughts. And so Laura asks, on forgiveness, will you say something about bringing our projections to the light of truth? So what we're doing is we're taking our thoughts and saying, these are the thoughts that are crossing my mind. And as long as the purpose is peace and the purpose is healing, then that is really the purpose of our relationship, or the relationships that we're in, which is to see beyond the thoughts. They don't mean anything. What does the Course say in the workbook? One of the very first early lessons, and I can't find it right now, it is that nothing we see means anything. Nothing we see means anything, including the thought that we have about ourselves, because we are not that self we thought ourselves to be. That is what needs to shift and change. So when we're communicating on a true level, which is really a place of honesty and consistency, then we are capable of doing that. We are stepping into our vulnerability to recognize our invulnerability. We're willing to say, yes, guys, I had a thought this morning that I did not want to wake up. And I look at it, and that's all it is. is a thought, and we look at it together. You may respond, someone may be out there and say, sheesh, you don't look very excited about being with us this morning. Or there's someone out there that says, wow, okay, I've had that thought too. And by simply looking, waiting, and not judging, we realize that we haven't gone anywhere. Despite the thought, nothing has happened. Here we are, I'm in Hawaii, there you are, watching this video. And beneath all that's been said, there's been something that has been unchanged. There's a recognition of something that lies beneath all our thoughts, beneath all of our perception. Therein lies the portal to what we truly are. Grace asks, how do we communicate authentically to someone who's built walls around you? Any clarification on what we mean by someone has built walls around you? I will try to answer the question, but if something can help clarify what we mean about walls around you, that would be helpful. How do we communicate authentically to someone? Well, one of the things that has worked in my experience is coming from a place of love. And that simply means coming from the purpose. So in my experience, when dealing with family, when I'm dealing with my partner, when I'm dealing with work, there's thoughts that have been judged against, or communication has been judged against. There's a fear to express. But knowing that the freedom lies in my capacity or willingness to express it, it comes or is expressed from the only place from which peace can emerge, and that's love. So I'll go back to the example in which my partner got snippy with me, and I asked the question, are you okay? Now that question could be asked out of a place of love, where there's a genuine desire to extend love, or it can come up as a sarcastic way of communication, which is, are you okay? So same words, different meaning. So the question is, how do I communicate authentically? I communicate with love. The purpose is peace. I'm sharing these thoughts that don't feel good in me, and I'm afraid to express it, but here I go, for the purpose of peace and for the purpose of love. So the question is, how do we communicate authentically? We communicate with love. Grace says, negative judgments about you. Yes, there will be people that seemingly have negative judgments about us. I loved, it may seem like there's people who have negative judgments about us, but we're only affected by those negative judgments because we actually believe to a certain degree that those judgments are true. That's what makes them painful. In my movie, A Course in Miracles, Enlightenment of Bus, Jacob Glass talks about, when we are judged against, or someone judges us, when we know it not to be true, it has no effect on us. Say something that I know not to be true. I'm not affected by it. Say something for which I think you may be right. That's when I suffer. So what we appear to see as someone judging us is really a reflection of some thoughts that we may have in our own mind. I remember once Byron Katie was talking to someone, and the person was really upset at their partner because their partner had been calling them fat. She's like, my husband calls me fat, and I can't stand it anymore, and blah, blah, blah. And I'm really upset. And Byron Katie said, well, did you ever have thoughts that you were fat? And she said, yes. And Byron Katie said, oh, so you share the same thought. So I share that with you. And by the way, I may not have paraphrased the dialogue between Byron Katie and this person exactly how it went down. But the point I'm trying to make is everything in the world is a reflection of an inner condition. So our willingness to look at what is it that we're experiencing and seeing and doing the investigative work about what we're holding within is going to be key to unlocking it. So thank you for asking that question. And so going back to communication, which this is perfect. This is all about communication. Can we be honest? And I remember having honest conversations, talking about judgments and negative judgments. I've had open conversations with my partner about, similar situation where there's a thought where I'm having this thought, this is how you judge me. Doesn't mean I'm trying to change the person. Doesn't mean that the person's guilty of anything. I'm only being honest with the thought. That is the thought that's coming to mind. That is authentic. Alexandra says, yes, we are blessed and lucky by authenticity. Authenticity is acknowledging what is there, what is real for us in the moment. Even if we, on another level, know it is not real, that is where the healing occurs. It is a recognition, okay, this is what's appearing, but I also know, because really what's within that saying what I also know to be true, which is that I'm not a body and everything's perfect, that aspect, that is the Holy Spirit. That is the part of us that is waking ourselves up to ourselves. So the question under communication that I have for you to ask, or for us to ask ourselves, is what secrets are we keeping and what experiences are we trying to avoid? Whenever we have a secret, whenever we don't want to communicate, whenever we don't want to be authentic, we are actually trying to avoid an experience. If I let you know my secret, you will judge me and I will feel shameful. So we're avoiding feeling shame. If I let you know my secret, if I'm honest with you, you will no longer love me. I don't want to experience not feeling loved. I don't want to experience being exposed. So I ask us, all of us, to think about where in our life are we keeping secrets. It doesn't mean doesn't mean that you need to go out and tell everybody your secrets. It doesn't mean that you have to forcefully, make yourself confess to something. That's not what this is about. Remember, you don't need to do anything for your perfection. It's only a willingness to look at this and explore what's being held there. Everything else will happen as grace will have it happen. The healing comes from relaxing the automatic or the egoic thought system that we've adapted as true. It is about relaxing that so that the Holy Spirit can show us something different, so that we can show ourselves, the greater part of ourselves can show us something different. And that something different is always this. It is this, the simplicity of really nothing and everything at the same time. Those are two words you'll hear a lot in a lot of non-dual conversations. This is it. Now the mind can't really grasp, the thinking mind cannot really grasp what I mean when I say this is it. But what I'm pointing back to is this undeniable presence that has no definition. There's something within us that does not move, does not age, does not change, which is simply of itself is peace itself. And that is the portal. And so we're coming back to this instant, this presence. There's a lot of words for it, but that is what the holy instant is. Our aim is to embody this holy instant, because in this holy instant is The portal to truth is the recognition of our identity in eternity. The realization that we already are what we've been looking for. Thank you, Rachel. Yes. Now the mind says, well, there's nothing here. Where do I go? What do I do? There's cold coffee in front of me, which I will gladly take a sip of. There's nothing. I can't do anything with nothing. The truth is the ego can't do anything anyway. What does the Course talk about the ego and say about the ego is it never existed anyway. So what has been happening? Well, what's been happening is we've been taken care of by life, and we will continue to be taken care of by life. Grace is always unfolding. It's always doing its thing. It's never not doing its thing. The question is, are we aware that grace is doing its thing? Or are we pretending that we're in charge? And so the holy instant really becomes a portal of experiential or experimenting. In other words, if we come into this, and we're not really coming into it, but it feels that way, as we allow ourselves to embody this presence, we allow ourselves to just be, if you will, even if it's for a brief moment, allow the emptiness to be. Inevitably, something will arise in that emptiness. Could be a thought, could be a word, it could be nothing, it could be a stretch. Whatever it may be, something will inevitably arise within that emptiness, because something's always arising in the emptiness. There's nothing in the world that's static. Everything is changing, everything is moving. But as we practice this idea of the holy instant, we become witness to grace and the way it's moving and everything. So everything that's needed, including the thought to heat up this coffee when this presentation's over, will come to mind, and that will take place. Thank you, James. Yes, it is a timeless experience because it's not bound by time. And so everything's given, and so the next thought to get coffee cool, everything, a good idea, thoughts come in, we respond. All of a sudden, with this recognition that grace is in charge, where we can recognize our divine providence. Everyone's living in divine providence. When I talked to David Hoffmeister, he reminded me that, it seems like in this world, there are people who live in divine providence and some people who don't. You look at Mother Teresa, or you look at the Peace Pilgrim. We often think of people who live in divine providence, that there's something special. No, we all live in divine providence. The difference is simply, are we aware of it or not? And when we step back into this holy instant, when we're open to this idea of presence, when we're open to the idea of being definitionless, then we're shown that we're given what we needed. And that's how life, it's so obvious. It's really how life works. I mean, I live on a ranch here in Hawaii, and so nature has a beautiful way of showing me this principle in action. The forest doesn't need to do much. I have cows that give birth by themselves. They know exactly what to do. They don't need someone in the middle of it. Our life too is the same way. And I point to this body as symbolically. I'm not meaning that life is the body. Life is everything. James says, the only thing I am in charge of is my willingness to receive, tune into what has always been within me. Yes, exactly. So the holy instant, we can say, I'll use James's term, it's a tuning in. This course is not beyond immediate learning unless you believe that God's will takes time. God's will does not take time. Love does not take time. It is here. It is now. The holy instant is without resistance to life. That's it. It's without resistance to life. It is just this. Holy instant is the time in which you receive and give perfect communication. Well, we've already learned that communication is connection. We receive and give, or recognize this connection. But it's not in concepts, it's in experience. So the question always for me that's helpful is, what is in my mind right now? What is in my mind right now? I got one more principle or teaching that I want to share, and we're going to wrap it up. And I just want to share a couple of things with you, and there's a request to come into the room, so I will go ahead and honor that request. The last miracle teaching is trust. Trust will settle every problem now. Trust is confidence in certainty. The question is, how certain are we of our identity? How certain are we? And in most cases, our certainty isn't complete. And I say in most cases our certainty isn't complete only because if we're having an experience of this world, of course the miracle says our aim is here to become perfect. We're already perfect, to recognize our perfection. And so there's still healing to be done. And so we will honor that in our, we'll honor that as our part of the symphony. This healing and this trusting. The problem has already been solved. There are no problems. It has been solved already. Resolution is not in form. The answer to any crisis we perceive is not in form. Every answer in form that we believe in will only serve to help the symptom, not the core, which at the core of every problem is this belief that I'm separate, that I'm something that I'm not. Infinite patience does not wait on anything. It is absent of anticipation, a timeline, a search. It is absent of a search. I started off this talk about my search to come to the end and recognize that there is no search. It's done. This is it. The simplicity is so obvious and simple that it's overlooked. And as long as it's being overlooked and as long as we're missing it, then there's healing to be done. And so that is what this is for. I'm going to now start to conclude this presentation. I want to share a couple of things, and then I'm going to invite someone into the room who's requested to come in, and we'll go as long as this goes, and that's where we are. If anybody has any questions, you can still use the chat as well. I want to make mention that if anybody wants to join me starting the 28th, which is next week on Sunday, I will be doing a 6-week, what I'm calling Ascension Circle workshop for 6 weeks. There is a cost for that workshop. However, I do not want to limit anybody or anybody who has a sincere call to be a part of this, what I'm calling the Ascension Circle. We will meet for 6 weeks. We will have exercises, weekly exercises to do and come to share, and together, someone asked the question, how do we look at, how do we become more authentic? Well, this 6-week workshop is really to dig into the specifics. And so some of the answers that you may have come up with some of the questions that you've asked yourself here, you can bring to the workshop, and we will explore this together and go deeper with these principles. It will provide consistency. So I bring you the opportunity to come join me. Again, it's going to be a small group. I haven't even really decided how big the group is going to be, but it's going to be small enough that if it gets more than 15 people, I may do 2 separate groups. But I want to keep it small so that we can actually work one-on-one together, and really provide a forum in which the trust level is really high and so forth. So you can check that out. I'm going to put this has a neat way of showing that. I'm going to put that online so that you should be able to see it right now in your window. So if you see it, you can link on it and learn more about it. If you want to do this and your heart is calling to do this, I invite you to do this. If money is an issue, I'm telling you right now that this isn't about money as far as needing to. If you want to do this, email me and we will work something out. I want you to be a part of this experience and this healing. So you email me. If you could afford to pay the fee, great. I basically live off the generosity of everybody who wants to join in this message. So I welcome you to pay the fee. The other thing I want to make mention is also, if you have not seen my movie Enlightenment or Bust, I want to invite you also to see the movie. The documentary is on acimdocumentary.com. I will also pull that up, and you can check that out, the movie. I will also say, if you want to see the movie and money is an issue, email me at craig@craigvillarubia.com. Craig@craigvillarubia.com. Yes. Email me. I will send you the documentary for free. So again, if you want to join the workshop, email me. If you want to watch the documentary, email me. Just connect with me through these two projects that I'm offering or extending to you as we work together to come into the truth. And with that, I'm going to bring in Dale, if technology works as it hopefully will. Dale, I'm bringing you in to the room. If there's any questions, also feel free to express them. So let's see if we can get Dale into the room. Dale is not showing up yet. So it may be that he could not get into the room to ask his question. I'll quickly just go over some other comments. Opportunity. Thank you, Tomas. James, the only thing I am in charge of is the willingness to accept, receive, tune into what has been within me. Yes. Christy, I signed up. Can't wait. Yes. Thank you for the opportunity to study these principles with you. Christy, I'm looking so forward to joining with you for the workshop. Also making a note that if anybody signs up for the workshop, the 6-week workshop, if you miss a class, no worries. It'll all be recorded and all be available to you to watch the replay. So you will be able to participate in the replay. So 6 sessions. It's going to be filled very similar to this experience, which is a lot of love, a lot of self-discovery, a lot more interactiveness. And I call it an adventure because it really is going into the depths of the mind to unveil what has been kept hidden in it. So that is what I have for you today. I'm thrilled to have had this opportunity to be with you. I invited Dale into the room, but for some reason he's not showing up in the room. So he may be having a technical problem or maybe even signed off. I don't know, but we'll see what happens. So again, thank you. I adore you. I love you. I've had so much fun this morning. Thank you for being witness to this amazing experience of awakening to our truth. And feel free to reach out to me, connect with me, join me on my Facebook page if you have not joined me there. I love to extend and share there. And yeah, this is the conclusion. I love you so, so, so much. Thank you, everybody. I hope you had a good time. Tomas, I'll see you there too. Bye, guys.